today we're going to go on with our worry issues. We've been talking a bit about how to get rid of worry. Today we're going to discuss a little bit about one of the things that we do worry about, and that is suffering. To our concern about suffering in life, that we don't want to suffer. Now, there are basically different ways that people suffer. And I think the one that we have the biggest issue with is suffering at the hands of others. I think that's the one that really is the scariest of all. There's obviously the suffering of natural disaster. There's suffering of illness and death, car accidents, these types of things. But I think people are more or less no one's at peace with it, but we're more at peace with the fact that people don't live forever. They got to die somehow. Most people die through natural causes. Then there's there's accidents, natural disasters, and then there's but the worst is the harm caused by human beings. That seems to really affect people in a major way. And you'll find that most people interestingly will have an issue with God when it comes to the people stuff. I personally think that if you want to have an issue with God, it should be regarding natural disasters and illness and accidents, things like that. But to have issues with God over human beings misusing free will, it's a little dubious. Because we all know God put free will into creation. We all know there's free will. We all have our choices, and therefore others have theirs. And you have parameters of choice from the good to the bad. All of us do. And so our issue with people making bad choices that can affect other human beings is certainly, it is God's fault, but only his fault for putting the free will in, not the actual choices made. Is that clear? It's God's fault for putting free will, but on the other hand, we would never want ours taken away. So you see the hypocrisy of it all. Like, we're complaining about free will, yet we want to keep ours. Just get rid of everyone else's, God. No one else should have free will, just me. I should be able to make bad choices, but everyone else. The issue really isn't with God. The issue is really with people's choice. And therefore, it's not so right for us to point our fingers at God that people make bad choices. And I think that's not really the way to go. We can have issues with God, but it's really over the fact that God put free will in altogether. What I'd like to discuss today, though, more than that, is the issue of suffering in general and how to get rid of suffering as much as we can, and understand suffering in general and pain in general, and how we look at it as human beings, and what should be our proper perspective of pain. Human beings generally avoid pain. You'll notice that most of your motivations in your life of what you do are to get the pleasure and avoid the pain. And for some reason, you're all in this room right now thinking somehow you're going to get more pleasure by being in here than not being in here. Now, obviously, that's not the kind of immediate pleasure of ice cream or sports or something, or a great concert or a great party. It would be you must believe somehow that there's going to be some piece of wisdom you're going to hear that's going to bring over all pleasure in your life. And therefore, you've been willing to sacrifice other pleasures to be in this room right now. But it's also to get rid of the misconception that the opposite of pain is pleasure. It's important to get rid of that misconception, because you'll notice the things that bring you the most pleasure are the things you put the most pain into. Someone who gets a lot of pleasure out of something usually put a lot of, sweat and tears and perhaps even blood into it. They put a lot into it. What's your parents' greatest pleasure, Michael?
Having me.
And what's their greatest pain?
Having me.
Right. The greatest pain is their greatest pleasure. And that's the way life is. The stuff we put the most work into is where we get the most pleasure. So it's important also, regarding suffering, is to know that there are things worth suffering. For example, one's pleasure they'll get out of having a child is worth the suffering of the pregnancy and birth experience. That's somehow worth it for people. If we want to spend our lives avoiding pain, we're not going to get the ultimate pleasure in life. You got to let go of it. Like, if you really want a life of pure comfort and avoid all pain, don't expect the great pleasures of life. Most people today really choose the pleasure of life without the pain. They don't go for the big pleasure. They go for pleasure. They don't get the big stuff. But, they'll never know what it's like to, I don't know, perhaps have a marriage or have a child or watch your child get bar mitzvah or to marry a child off, which I got to do this year. I married a child off. If you can imagine what that was like. It was a mind-blowing experience. But most people, my peers, they'll be 90 when they marry off a kid, meaning the kids I grew up with in LA, in the beach community there. Those who have kids, they're pretty little at this point. They're not marrying off kids. They'll wait a long time to get that pleasure. But these days, many people aren't even willing to get married because there's so much pain involved. And so they're not willing to go there. So they'll get the pleasure. They'll get some pleasure. But not the deep pleasures that come with all the real pain. Next is so we've discussed two subjects so far, because your minds are probably just spinning out while I'm up here talking. Just to tell you what we've discussed so far, we've discussed the ways that people suffer, and we touched on how the way that suffering at the hands of people is one of our major issues with God, when it really shouldn't be, because it's just people's bad choice and we don't want to lose our free will. Remember that subject? Yeah. So we can actually start chilling out. We don't have to blame God for the Holocaust. You can blame God for the Holocaust because there's a lot of bad choices made, but only for the fact that God created choice. That you could blame God for. But even that's hypocritical because you like yours. I want my choice. So I should have choice, but Nazis don't get choice. They also get choice. So blaming God for the Holocaust that's not God's fault. Because in the end, we like our free will. Then we discussed the subject of pain and pleasure and how we're willing to forego certain pleasure, meaning to put the pain into certain things to get the ultimate pleasure, to get the greater pleasure of life, that we're willing to put the pain in for that. You guys ever been to a Shabbos table? Just as an example, you've been to a Shabbos table and you've seen a couple interacting in a beautiful way like you never saw before? Yeah, you've seen that? And everyone looks so happy? Yeah? Well, guess what? I'm not going to say they're pretending, it's real. What is that they've worked really hard. That couple's worked really hard. See, you only get a snapshot of the Shabbos table. You don't get to see what went into that couple and how much they've worked. Because we get married here knowing we're going to work. We're not going for some pleasure, honeymoon type of, romantic ride here. The way we look at marriage, it's everything you could never have achieved in your personal growth, single. That's the way we look at marriage. What I'm saying is that when you're single, there's a certain amount of growth you'll get, but you will hit a ceiling at a certain point, and it's only through the challenge of marriage, through the crucible of marriage and children, that takes you to those next levels of growth. Now, I'm not saying if someone lives single and lived their whole life single and went through everything in life besides marriage and child raising, I'm not saying they won't get that growth eventually, but the way God created human beings is you grow as a single person and then you grow as a married person, and the marriage puts you in positions of challenge that are unlike anything that you could ever have as a single person. And that bumps you up to your next stage so that you can get to your next and next and next and next levels of growth. But again, we look at marriage as challenge. And so when you get that snapshot of a couple at a Shabbos table, don't think that a lot of hard work and a lot of tears didn't go into that couple to get them to where they're at. Now, the next thing is how can we avoid suffering altogether? So there's two types of suffering. Okay, when it comes to suffering, there are two kinds. One kind is what I'd like to call, just for your English, I'm going to use an Eastern term, for those who speak English. How do you spell karmic anyway? Karmic, like that?
I think it's a C at the end.
Yeah? Karmic suffering versus reincarnation suffering. Karmic suffering is the energy you put out in your daily life. Like, what kind of energy do you have? Do you have a positive energy? Do you have a scared energy? Do you have a timid energy? Do you have an outgoing energy? Do you have an energy of abundance, or do you have an energy of scarcity? What's the energy you put out? Are you the type of person who treads lightly on society and on this world? Or are you a person who's making this big footprint and, taking everyone out with you, use people as stepping stones, leave your litter after the picnic in the park? How do you live your life? However it is, whatever the energy is, you have an energy field. Whatever that energy field is that you're putting out there is what people are going to be dealing with. And that's going to feed right back to you. Again, whatever energy you put out there is going to feed right back to you. Give you an example. I had a student in yeshiva here who I was teaching Talmud class, and every Sunday, this guy would come back after the weekend. Our weekends are Friday, Saturday. So the guy would come in on Sunday every week with either a black eye, a broken nose. He had a stab wound one week. He literally had a stab wound with stitches in it. He had been stabbed, knifed. Every week. And every week he would say, I don't know what happened. I was just walking down the street. And, of course, I asked the rest of the class, have you walked down that street before? And they're like, sure. Anything happened to you? No. I said, I've been walking down that street for 2 decades. Nothing ever happened to me. Why is it every week you come back with another wound from another fight on another, peaceful street of Jerusalem? And anyway, eventually I was able to show him that he's really a stink bug, and he's putting out this punch me energy out there. And that punch me energy causes guys who also like getting punched to smell it. They smell it, like dogs. This could be a great way to have some guy land a punch right in my head. So some guy smells this guy and says, great time to get punched. You're probably thinking, great time to punch. No, this guy also wants to get punched. And so the greatest way to get punched is to punch somebody, right? No, how do you get someone to punch you? You can't just walk up to them, punch me. He won't punch you. There are people who just can't get punched because their energy is just unpunchable. Have you ever noticed that victims of any kind of abuse usually have it recurring? You ever notice that? It's usually the same people who suffered a certain kind of abuse keep getting it back. There's a whole bigger discussion. I like to call it the satellite dish of life, that we're all wearing a satellite dish over our heads and we don't see it. And it's just pulling in all kinds of garbage interaction. Right now we're discussing the garbage interaction of a kid in my Gemara shir, who would come in every weekend. After the weekend, he'd come in having gotten punched. So anyway, when you clean up that energy, as this particular boy did, the issues go away. So when he cleaned up his energy, his issue of getting clocked by people in town just disappeared because he cleaned up his energy. The suffering went away. Okay? Again, we're discussing suffering. We're starting with the karmic energy that you emit. And when you clean that up, so trouble stops coming your way. I do this work in a very, very deep way. I run seminars internationally. I'm actually flying out next week to New York. I'll be running it in Brooklyn for men and women. I actually have a women's seminar for the first time in 10 months in Jerusalem. I usually run it for men in Jerusalem, but I have a women's seminar, first time in 10 months, being run between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is a tremendous opportunity. But if I don't have enough signups by women, online signups, by a certain date, I forget what date we gave, then I'm canceling it because, again, we haven't ran one in 10 months and we don't know if we'll be able to market it in time. But the whole point of that work is to transform your wave patterns, transform the energy that you put out that the world and people keep feeding back to you. That's the point of the work I do. Yes?
My question is about the 2 different kinds of suffering. Are you saying that karma is a Jewish idea?
Karma is a reality. It's not an idea, it's a reality. So whether you call it karmic or in Hebrew, we call it mida keneged mida, mida keneged mida, measure for measure. Meaning whatever measure you're putting out there is the measure that you're going to get back. Okay? So however you want to say it. It's like something, you know, like you can call a table a shulchan in Hebrew or a table in English. That's what we're discussing, is your energy field. Okay? The only reason I put karmic is because people are familiar with the word.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, as far as reincarnation, that's a different kind of suffering. You could have the best energy in the world. You have amazing energy. You're just full of abundance and love and caring and like treading lightly on this planet. You know, you're just so awesome in the way you deal with life here. And nevertheless, God just somehow like drags you over the coals in various situations. Raise your hand if you ever felt like you were just getting dragged over the coals in life. Ever happened to you? Dragged over the coals? More than half the room has felt like they're getting dragged over the coals. Now, whenever you're being dragged over the coals, the first question to ask is, are you putting out an energy that the world's just feeding back to you, and that's why you're dealing with this kind of suffering? But the answer, if the answer is yes, clean up the energy. If the answer is no, then it could be what's called reincarnation, what we'd call it cosmic debt, or maybe you'd like to call it residue, cosmic residue from previous lives. When you live in this life here, so you deal with your own life and your memories since you're a child growing up, but you've lived many lives. Now, stuff can bleed through into this life from previous lives. Most people don't finish off all their business when they're living their life. They finish off the business of that life, but they didn't necessarily finish off all their business. And so there's residue. It's been found in regression hypnosis, in hypnosis therapy and regression. Those who believe in past lives and stuff, who've done past life regression therapy, that most of the time when you're regressing a patient who has suffered abuse, they find themselves in the previous life the abuser. So often they are the abuser. Shocked to find that they are the abuser in a previous life. Yes?
Are Jewish people allowed to do regression therapy?
Yeah,
They are?
it's permitted, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a major question that I was present for the whole adjudication of it, like when some big rabbis were judging whether it was okay or not. How it's done was more important to the rabbis, meaning they did not appreciate going to someone who's like, you know, you were a witch, you know, or something, and you're like, witch. That they don't appreciate. But when it was done through hypnosis, where the person themselves is going into those lives and talking about what they see around them, that they thought was kosher. They believed was a kosher thing to do. They weren't saying they agree with that as that it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. They're just saying it was kosher if someone chose to do it. Yeah. Anyway, but there's an inordinate amount of people who had cosmic debt because they went back as victims and found themselves to be perpetrators in previous lifetimes, over and over again, over and over and over again, because of this cosmic debt. And so things are coming around from previous lives. Now you're probably wondering, how do we fix that? How do we fix that? Okay, this one I can clean up my energy, but how am I going to deal with the stuff that's just coming down the pipes from previous lifetimes? I don't even know where to watch out. I don't know how to watch out for it. I don't know how I could avoid it. I don't know if I'm supposed to avoid it. The answer is that you don't have to avoid it. You're not necessarily even supposed to avoid it. You got to go through what you got to go through. But there is another issue, and that's repetition. It could come repetitively, and that you can stop. If you find that you're having a similar repetition of, again, we're not talking about, because this guy is definitely going to be dealing with a loop. He's going to constantly, or she's going to constantly be having these really lousy relationships or really lousy interactions. That's all because they have not cleaned up their energy. But I'm talking about someone whose energy's clean, but they're still going through stuff. Again, you have to embrace your life. If stuff's happening to you in your life, you can't resist that, because that's like resisting your own life. And resisting one's own life is like, in a way, it's like cancer. In a way, it's resisting life. That's how, like, you see that people's actual bodies resist life. That's the cells. The cancerous cells are resisting their own life. You don't want to be resisting your life. It smells too much like cancer. And if stuff's coming your way that you have to go through, it's clear this has got your name on it. You know, you could go to the federal building and do a name change. It's still coming. You know, it's got your name all over it. Okay, that when you got that stuff happening and it's got your name all over it, don't resist it. Is that clear? You can't resist it. It's got to be something that's embraced and accepted within you. That, okay, let's get on our gear and get through this. Whatever it is I got to get through. And you get through it. And you'll notice you're going to grow from it. Yeah, you're going to grow tremendously from it. And you grow through it, and you'll become a greater person as a result. And you most likely will even look back at it and say, you know, I see why that was necessary. I see why I had to go through that. And you may even get to the level, as most people do, is I wouldn't even trade it now. Now I'm on the other side. I wouldn't have even traded it. That's pretty heavy, to not even trade it. But what do you do when it's repetitive? What do you do when it keeps coming back? Like a deep kind of suffering that's nothing to do with bad energy. I got great energy. Yeah, the person has great energy. But it just keeps coming back. And the answer is to get it to stop looping. The reason it's still looping is because the person's still resisting. And so the way to get it to stop looping is to come to acceptance. Now again, I already said that, didn't I? Didn't I say to embrace it? I'm saying something else. I'm saying when you're going through something, embrace it. I'm gonna have to ride through this rough ride. So, you know, put on the helmet and ride through it. Get people to support you, get a support group, get some family members there for you, and you're gonna ride through it. It's a great thing about being married is you have a permanent in-house support group called a spouse. Yeah, so I guess that's one of the ways you can figure out if someone would be a good spouse for you, is if they're supportive in the way you need to be supported. People have different ways they need to be supported. So anyway, but and you weather this situation. But if you find it keeps coming back, it's probably because you've been resisting it, and you haven't really come to accept that this is what God is sending you to fix you. But when you come to acceptance, it'll go away. I'm not saying another thing won't come, but it'll be a different thing. Something about something else altogether. Is that clear? So, let's go back. If you're having negative interactions or the world is not going your way because of bad energy, clean up your energy. How do you do that? So, there's different ways to do that. I happen to train people in how to do that, but you can certainly go seek it if your timing doesn't work with me. Cosmic debt, reincarnation cosmic debt, is weather it. When you got to weather it, just weather through the situation. And if you find it repeating itself, then you have to come to a deep level of acceptance. And just say, God, I accept it. And let's move on now. Like enough reruns on this similar situation. I know a particular person who went through 4 reincarnations, 4 whole incarnations, lived a full life 4 times, suffering the same exact stuff. Because every time he suffered it, he resisted it. And so he just came back and went through a whole life of repetition, suffering, whole life repetition, suffering, whole life repetition, suffering. Yeah?
I have another question.
Yeah.
With the karmic energy, you're talking about like once we clean it up, then we're in acceptance, or?
I wasn't discussing acceptance here.
Okay, that's only with the reincarnation.
Yeah.
And then once we clean it up, is it possible that it will like become polluted again, or?
The karmic stuff?
Yeah, or is that just like a one-time thing? Or is it
I think from what I found is most people love the feeling so much of clean energy living that they have zero tolerance for any more garbage in their lives. Usually when someone, like, for example, cleaned up their diet, you could probably predict that 10 years later they're not going to be like eating junk food. You know, you begin to love life from a clean place. So you usually don't regress. People do regress, but most people don't. If they're really coming from a true clean energy place, they don't regress usually. People do, some do.
So if you do the karmic cleanup and that's all clean, then...
And you come to acceptance of this stuff.
Well, if you're still suffering, then is it safe to assume that it is from cosmic?
Yeah, oh yeah, that's what I was saying, is once you've cleaned this up, if you're still going through stuff, it's probably stuff you have to go through. And that's great. It's fine, you know, and you don't always go through it. It might be 2 years from now you're going to go through something, and maybe 5 years from then. Now, a couple more things. One is a trick how to get out of going through your own stuff, and that is help others. One of the tricks of not having to go through so much suffering is you take on other people's suffering. Be there for people. You be there for people so much so that God says, wow, you know, this person is so out there for people, like so out there, and like really putting himself or herself in the line of fire for people who are suffering in this way or the other way, that I can't afford for him or her to be going through their own stuff. I just can't afford it. I need them. Like, you got to become one of God's agents for other people's issues. So much so that God just says, you know what, this person, I can't have them lose any energy in their work. So become a person who's about helping others, and then God will kind of, you know, lay off a bit on whatever stuff you have to go through, because you're here to do service for other people. Yeah, I don't know. Moshe, have you noticed this works at all over there? Not for you. No, seriously, have you noticed?
Yeah, totally.
And Moshe lives a life of service, and he's there's our first. Anyone else notice this, that they made their lives lives of service, and they just noticed things got easier? Anyway, try it. Make your life a life of service, so much so that God says, this person's busy. It's too busy. You know, like I can't have her or him burdened by the stuff that they normally go through, because they're so busy helping other people through their stuff. Clear?
So,
Yeah.
what happens with them having to deal with that stuff, like their...
That's what God will just wash it clean.
Okay.
Yeah.
So their soul no longer has to go through this process of coming back and...
I would guess. Meaning, if this lifetime was to go through that stuff, but the person's just so busy in serving others that they didn't go through it, I imagine that it's not going to come back another life. I'm not. These aren't things we necessarily know so much about. Some stuff we know, a lot of stuff we don't. So maybe they are going to get it in the next life. I don't know. I don't think so. This life, if this life's to clean something up and we wound up not having to clean it up because we're so busy with everybody else, I think we might be able to get away with it. Now, here's the other thing. It's a major caveat. I don't want to scare anyone away from having kids, but when you have kids, it's a whole new reincarnation. That kid's not really your kid. Okay? This is God's kid, who God has used you and your spouse to have a kid. Now, that kid's coming from his or her own reincarnation. They've got their own things to fix. They've got their own lives to live. And it's, you know, they may share your last name. They may live under your roof. But they got their own stuff they're going to be going through. And so before I was talking about how we can get rid of suffering. How? Clean up your energy and come to acceptance over the stuff that you're dealing with, your cosmic debt. Well, easier said than done, because once you have children, you are directly linked to their lives. Yeah, anyone here has kids? Kids. All right. So you have kids. Yeah, you notice that if your kid comes home from school and something went wrong in there? What?
It's their own story.
It's their story, but how are you doing?
It becomes mine.
It becomes yours. It just, you guys know that. You live totally linked to whatever your kids go through. Whatever your kids go through is what you're going to be going through. So it gets rather complicated. Now, this is good reason if you're going to have kids is to have like one, two. But in our world, we have like, we just keep going.
That's a small family, that's only 4.
Yeah, you have four kids there, and anyway, but you get like we just were at a bris last week of a man who's older than me. He just made a circumcision of his new child. Everyone said, "Hey, we're all heading out to the bris of so and so," and I'm like, "Oh, he had a grandkid," and they're like, "No, it's his kid." I'm like, "He's still having kids." This kid was born an uncle to like nieces and nephews, multiple nieces and nephews, because it was his 15th kid. And he is directly linked, he and his wife are directly linked to every one of those kids. And whatever those kids are going through in their marriages, a bunch of them are married, some are single, who knows what's going on with all those kids over there. And kids are, you can't predict what's going to be with your kids. All kinds of stuff's going on with each kid. And so I imagine it's hard to sleep a little bit because you're linked to those kids. And of course the answer there is, again, looking up to God and just saying like, God, you're the king of the universe, and I trust that I'll make my choices as best as I can, but I trust you're going to handle the rest. I'll do my best. You do the rest. Please take care of my children. Yeah. Please take care of those kids. Yeah. We have to take care of ourselves, by the way, so our parents can sleep at night. Okay, any other questions at this point? How are we doing?
Just a comment.
What?
Just a comment. It seems
Okay.
like, from what you were saying, like being a parent could be sort of like a built-in opportunity to be of service.
Of service to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But again, you're gonna go through whatever they're going through. Yeah. In general, if you look at people just go through so much. Like, imagine how much you'll have gone through from the time you're born till the time you're like 80. Think how much you'll have gone through. And yet, we're all still trying to seek pleasure and avoid pain. When at the end, when you get to 80 and you look yourself in the mirror, you'll just be like, whoa, been through it all, just been through so much. Well, when you look at it from that perspective, eventually you have to say, we're here to go through stuff. Life is not a picnic. Life isn't just, isn't some walk in the park. You're going to go through all this stuff, so why don't we all just instead start saying, I'm here to go through stuff. Like, I'm here to go through stuff in my life, and I'm not going to avoid it, not going to resent God for it. I'm not going to resist it, but rather I will embrace life, all of life, and all that it brings. And that's the place we all have to get to. And now let's bring God back into it in a major way, and that is that God's running the show. We have to give God the keys to the car. No one likes to be a passenger, but it's nice to know. The one place I don't mind being a passenger so much is in cab drivers. When I'm using a cab. That's what he does for a living, he's always in that car, he's always driving around with it. If anyone's going to do a good job, it's him. More than anyone else who's maybe drives more occasionally, or they only drive to work and back. Cab drivers are driving everywhere. They're on the highways, they're on the streets, they're in parking lots, they're in reverse, they're in go, I can sit pretty well in a cab and relax, except for, of course, telling him which way I think would be faster. At which point he just looks at me like, shut up. But who's really driving the car in our lives? Who's really got his hands on the wheel of our lives? And the answer is God, the creator of the universe, is driving this car. Which means that we should be the most relaxed passengers inside God's car. We have to be the most relaxed passengers. Now, you may ask the question of, oh, really? I can just should I just go to sleep in the back seat? Like, I can just be that relaxed? So it brings up the whole subject of, well, kind of. God's driving the car. You should definitely be relaxed. Your heart rate shouldn't go up with God driving the car. You should be nice and chill, steady breathing, feeling good. The only issue is that God expects you to do all kinds of things in life. God wants you. God created you to get certain jobs done in life. And those jobs that you got to do are responsibilities that are going to include dotting your I's and crossing your T's and dealing with all kinds of all the details that come up with your life. And if you think you're going to kick back in the back seat and someone else is going to handle those details, I mean, obviously, if you hire someone to do those details, they're done. But if you think you're going to kick back and all the details of life are going to get handled because God's driving the car, well, the car God's driving requires you to be at work, busy at work. And we've got it. So it's a balance between what's called bitachon and what's called hishtadlus. And this is God's running the show. God's running the show versus get to work. Meaning I can't just hang around and expect my bank account's going to fill up without me working. I got to get to work. I can't expect that in the winter that somehow it's going to be warm in my house if I don't either build a fireplace, chop wood, or buy wood, or get a heater or something. I can't just sit there and expect God to heat my house for me. Is that clear? So on the one hand, I can be very chill knowing God's running the show. On the other hand, I've got to be involved. I've got to be busy doing all kinds of things, yet still maintaining my trust that God's running the show. And this gets very, very difficult. And you'll see a lot of people will avoid life responsibility of our hishtadlus in life. There'll be escapists who want to say, oh, God will do it, God will do it, God will do it. God's going to help. Reminds me of a joke of a boy who was escaping life, and he comes to yeshiva. And he's learned about Hashem. And now he says, Baruch Hashem. And all those things. Hashem Yishmor, and Hashem Yazor, and Mirtz Hashem. And he's got it all wired, yeah. So his father calls from Los Angeles or somewhere. He says, son, what's going on over there in Israel? You were supposed to be back last week. He says, oh, I've decided to stay. I'm going to stay in yeshiva. He says, stay? What are you going to do for a living? And he's like, Hashem will help. And he's like, what's this Hashem? He says, because the father never heard the word. He knows the word God. He doesn't know the word Hashem. I mean, how are you going to make ends meet? He says, I told you, Hashem will help. What are you going to wind up doing for a living? He says, Hashem will provide. And so he finally hangs up the phone with his son, and the wife is like, what did he say? What did he say? He says, I don't know, but he keeps calling me Hashem. So we have, God expects us, and how he builds us is by us engaging in this world and making ends meet and paying the bills and dealing with all the bureaucracies of life. And, Hashem, yes, he's running the show, but he's expecting us to get up and act and to do all kinds of stuff. Now, in the end, he's doing that too, but he won't do it if you don't at least go through the motions. And maybe that's the best way we have to look at it, is we have to go through the motions. I have to go through the motions of work. I have to go through the motions of chopping wood to heat the house with the wood-burning stove. I have to go through those motions. Who's really chopping that wood? God is. God's chopping that wood. Yeah? Who's really doing all that work? God's doing that work. Okay, I'm going through the motions of work. We have to get to that level of where we really get to the point where we feel like we're just going through the motions that God's really doing through us. And to know that it's really Hashem, that it's all Hashem. But again, the only way we'll ever chill out in life is knowing that God's running the show. That's the only way we'll get rid of worry, is to really get that into our blood. And when I say knowing, I don't mean knowing here. We're talking about integration, to integrate the God's running the show. How? How do we get integrated? How do we actually get to that point? I think one of the things that's a nice idea is to journalize a little bit of how you got to where you got to in life, to see that in the end, really God was running the show the whole time. I'll give you an example. Raise your hands if you chose to come to Israel on this trip. Okay? Well, it's not true. It's not true. Think about it for a second. How many circumstances had to line themselves up for you to be here right now? Basically, God's running the show. Okay? He's running the show. And God set up this, and this person had to talk to that person, who had to meet that person. And then all these different circumstances got totally lined up, something that only God could have handled. And then at the very last moment where it was like, hey, you want to go to Israel? Like then God put the microphone in front of your mouth, and you're like, sure. and you're like, really made a big choice there, you know. Meanwhile, the whole thing was set up. Well, you've been drawn to Israel, right? God has drawn you here through all these circumstances that God had to totally line up for you. So that's one way to integrate it, is to just look back on your life and maybe break out a journal and just journalize, like, what were all the details that had to happen for this to have taken place? And you'll see that God somehow thread a needle through all kinds of details, all kinds of variables that had to perfectly line up for that needle to shoot right through it, for you to have made the choices that you, in the end, made. So that's very important too. Another way to get it through your bones is to take some risks that are not dangerous, non-dangerous risks, and practice with trusting God on those non-dangerous risks. What do I mean by non-dangerous risks? A kind of risk where you're afraid of it, but everyone else would say there's nothing to be afraid of, and you just do it. You just do it. I don't care if it's rock climbing, rappelling, skydiving, but choose some kind of thing where you're going to have to just trust. You're going to have to just trust. And you got to just put it out there and just start playing with the trust game. In my house, we call it the trust game. When you fall into someone's hands and you got to fall. So they do it from chairs and tables and stuff. They'll stand up on the edge of the table, or the kitchen counter's even higher. And they just stand there and they just go right into daddy's arms. And I go nice and low. So they have to just really free fall. And if they do any of that stuff, that kind of bracing themselves, then they have to do it again. And so we have to play our own trust game in life. Figure out different things in life that we're afraid of that are not really dangerous, but we've created in our minds that it's dangerous, and play that trust game. Another thing is to find something in life where you're holding back. Find some aspect of life, maybe professionally. There's some area in life where you've been holding yourself back based on some fear. And just choose 5 things or 3 things, 3 action steps that you'll do towards it to see if God really, makes it happen. Okay, so something you want to do in life, something you feel you should be doing in life, but you've just been totally holding yourself back. And just say, you know what, God, I'm putting this all in your hands. I'm going to do these 3 action steps, but you have to make it happen. And see if God makes it happen for you. Anyone else want to put out there, since we're on this subject, other kinds of ways to build our integration that God's running the show? Anyone else got something for us? We can get it onto this little video here. What? Yeah, well, Shabbat was built originally for that, that you're not going to work 1 day a week. How are you going to survive without working a day a week? But today, there's so much affluence, there's so much wealth that not working a day a week is not that big a thing. Although, that people had to trust God for their physical survival by not working that 1 day a week. Today, it's social survival, meaning for many of you, telling your friends you're going to a Shabbos dinner instead of going out to party is literally putting your social life on the line. So in a way, Shabbos still is a major trust thing.
Well, it's like a sign. It's one of the 10 Commandments. It's like if you keep it, like I used to not keep it when I was get it. The more you keep it, the more you feel the sign, you know.
Okay, that's true, but right now we're discussing getting involved and trusting that God's going to take care of business. Okay, anyone else got any trust examples? I gave a few ways of getting this done. Any others? Well, I'll conclude with this, and that is that we gotta have it if we want to be sane. We gotta have it, because life is too crazy. There's so many open-ended aspects of life. And to not have someone driving this car of our lives, you know, because God knows we don't want to be driving it. You know, being in the driver's seat of your own life is so precarious, it's so dangerous. And you see, even the most solid person you'll ever meet in your life, I don't care if he's got $1 billion in his bank account, he's dotted all his I's, crossed all his T's, he's got every bureaucratic thing taken care of in his life, he's got it all wired, he's married his kids off, everything's wired, is going to have everything he owns ripped away from him when he dies. All of us are going to lose it all. And he will become horribly paranoid of that day towards the last 20, 30 years of his life. Horribly paranoid. It'll after a while, he will succumb to a constant fixation on his death when he will lose it all. Every person loses everything in the end. And so I'm saying that, and the rest of us don't have $1 billion in the bank, and we're going to have to deal with all kinds of stuff to make it in life. We're all going to have to go through a lot. That guy who was born into some rich family isn't going to go through. We're all going to go through a lot in life to make it. Even our marriage, or your wedding day, is going to be the scariest moment. Like, you're going to dedicate your heart to this person forever. You got to have God there. There's got to be someone driving that car of the day of your marriage. You're going to be having kids, going through pregnancies. Pregnancy's the scariest. What's going to be at the birth? You know, you don't have a choice. You got to arrive in Grand Central Station here, i.e. the hospital, and have the baby. It's going to be a C-section. Is it going to be a natural birth? Is it going to be, you know, is it going to be 3 days labor? Is it going to come out in the hallway? You know, there's so many options of what could possibly happen. Yet you can't. There's nothing you can do. You got to get there, and it's hard for the woman. It's hard for the husband. Someone's got to be driving this car of our lives, or we're going to be suffering through this life. And it's so important that we really get to trust. We got to put it in our hearts. We got to put it in our brains. We got to put it in our bodies. Our whole being has to just be going through the motions of life, because God's really pulling the strings. And we're just doing. If you got to go get a job, you're just going through the motions. God's doing this. You put out those prayers before you go for the job interview, and you gotta put out those prayers on the way to the hospital, and we gotta trust. How are we gonna do this if not totally trusting God, if not recognizing God is driving this car? That's the only way to keep your heart rate at a normal level, going through your own life and going through life as a Jew and going through life here in Israel. It's the only way we're gonna make it. It's not something we can avoid. We got to work on trust. Got to work on trust. And just to conclude, what I already brought up is journalizing the past. Is since we've gotten this far, we're going to make it the rest. Like, for example, here's Sinai. Here's the end of days, which is 6,000 years. So we're at 5774. So far God's got a perfect track record. We're right about here. So you look, God's always had a perfect track record. Meaning in your own life, God's had a perfect track record in your life of, in the end, making sure things worked out. I mean, you did make it to Jerusalem. I mean, I don't know what you went through in life, but if we could go back to one of the times you were suffering, I know more than half you raised your hands that you've suffered before. But imagine now that you just go back and exactly what you're wearing right now, at exactly what age you are right now, and you go back and you pop into the scene there, and you're like, guess what? I'm here from Jerusalem. And you're going to totally make it. It's going to be great. You know, you're going to make it. And the person's like, oh my gosh, you're me. And you made it. Like, you're on the other side learning Torah in Jerusalem. Wow, I'm going to make it through this? And you're like, yeah, you're going to make it. You're going to be great. And you're like, yes. Okay, go away. I can get through this because I know I'm going to make it. Okay, so you could do that at any point of your life. You'd see that you could pop in and say, you're going to make it. So know that now, and know that tomorrow, and know that the next day, know it next week, that whatever we're going through, we're going to make it. And we're going to be better for it. And God's building us through it. And we're not here to avoid pain. We're here to embrace life and to go through the lives that God has given us, both to clean up our energy and to go through whatever it is we have to go through in this lifetime, in this reincarnation, to perfect ourselves in our beings and in our lives, to get to the other side, which is obviously, stuff we don't know what it's all about, but we'll be there and we'll understand that. We'll understand someday why it is we have to go through what we go through. Shalom, everyone.